All right, and we're back for another episode of Black Life Amplified. It's the virtual town hall series hosted by the African American Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany L. Wright with Insight News. And before we get started, I want to give a very special thank you to our sponsors, which include the Minneapolis Foundation, Northpoint Health and Wellness, and Children's Minnesota for making this town hall possible. I also want to give a very special thank you to our community partner organizations who produced this town hall and put it all together. Those organizations include Northpoint Health and Wellness, Children's Minnesota, Insight News, Gray Matter, the Minnesota Spokesman-Recorder, and Minnesota Community Care. Now, be sure to check out the African American Leadership Forum Facebook page or the YouTube channel to watch previous episodes of Black Life Amplified, and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date on all future and previous episodes. Now, today's episode of Black Life Amplified is about disrupting cycles of community violence. It is a reflection on the recent uptick in violence within our community. As you all are aware, 3 children were shot in the head in North Minneapolis: Nia Allen, who was 6 years old, Trinity Ottoson Smith, who was 9. They've both now passed away, and 10-year-old Ladavion Garrett Jr. is still in critical condition. Winston Smith, a Black man, was falsely accused of being a murder suspect in uptown Minneapolis before being shot and killed by a U.S. Marshal. And just 2 days ago, Dayana Kanidek was killed protesting the murder of Winston Smith as a man drove full speed into a crowd of protesters. So all of this happening in the midst of a global pandemic, following the Derek Chauvin trial, the murder of George Floyd, Dolal Eid, and countless others. So the Twin Cities community has been in a state of perpetual grief, trauma, and frustration. And on today's episode of Black Life Amplified, our intention is not to further traumatize our viewers, but to get clear on the cause and the impact of the many forms of violence that are happening within our community, and to hopefully find a path forward towards healing. So we know that one conversation is not going to change the state of our world or even the state of the Twin Cities right now. However, we're committed at Black Life Amplified to being a part of the solution. So on today's panel, I have joining us Adriene Thornton, who is a nurse and infection preventionist with Children's Minnesota, Lisa Clemens, who is the founder and director of A Mother's Love Initiative, and Sasha Cotton, who is the director for the Office of Violence and Prevention with the City of Minneapolis. So welcome, panelists. Thank you so much for joining us here on Black Life Amplified. I want to get started by first addressing community gun violence. So Lisa, I first want to start with you. First and foremost, before we even get into the interview, just offering my condolences. Last time you were on this show, it was you and KG Wilson representing A Mother's Love Initiative, and Anaya Allen was KG's granddaughter, who recently passed away. So I first want to ask, how are you? How is KG? How are you all holding up? Oh, you're on mute, Lisa. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. The team is holding up. We also had members of our team related to Ladavion. We have members related to Ladavion Garrett Jr. So it's just been really, really hard for the team. KG is really struggling. He continues to struggle. I talk to him every day to try to keep his spirits up, but he's really struggling, as well as Anaya's other grandfather, who is struggling with this a lot.
Yeah, I can only imagine. You know, for you all to do the work that you do, and then to have these tragedies hit so close to home, it's mind-boggling, right? Because you already do so much. We see you, we see KG, we see the pink t-shirts, right? Every time something happens in the community, you are out on the streets, boots on the ground, making it happen. So when something like this happens, even to the people who are doing the work, who are in the community, who are doing the right things, why do you think that these things are happening?
I think for me, it's a lot of unchecked violence in our community. It's been slowly happening. And then I think when Chauvin killed George Floyd, and then we opened the door to that no more police conversation, I think we all take a part in what's happening in this community right now. But I think we're headed back to Murderapolis. And it's because of the infighting that's happening in the community between our leaders and the inability to unite with one another, meaning our community leaders. So I think we all hold a responsibility in what is happening, but I think our judges and prosecutors hold the biggest part of responsibility with our city council.
Okay. And I do want to name also that there is a $30,000 reward for information that leads to the arrest of the shooters responsible for the 3 children who were shot. And I'm wondering if you feel like that incentive is going to help lead to an arrest, a prosecution, conviction, et cetera, especially within the Black community. I just wonder if that is going to be helpful. I feel like we've always had this stigma of snitching, right? And don't ask, don't tell, or if it doesn't involve you, don't say anything. What message do you have to community members who may have information, and how we even just get out of this culture of not being willing to speak up and hold one another accountable?
We set that example for our kids a long time ago. We teach our kids, if she hits you, even in toddler and preschool, because I was a toddler and preschool teacher, if that kid hits you, you better hit that kid back. So we don't start their life teaching them how to de-escalate, how to use their words. And then when they get older and they no longer want to hit you, they want to pick up a gun and shoot you, we have lost ground by that time. We teach our kids, stop telling, don't tell. And then when they get older, we want them to tell, but we didn't set that example for them when they were younger kids. We teach our kids, if they're acting out and there's a police officer nearby, we tell our kids, if you don't stop acting out, that police officer is going to take you to jail. And then we expect them to later trust that organization of people. Now, the police department creates their own mistrust situations, but we start these messages to our kids very early in life. And that is something that we have to change as a people.
Yes, that's very true. And the information will be down at the bottom of the screen. Anyone with information is encouraged to call the Crime Stoppers Anonymous tip line. It's 1-800-222-TIPS, or you can visit crimestoppersmn.org. And again, it is anonymous. I want to pivot to...
Can I ask you a favor if you'll let me speak on that reward? So right now we're in the process of putting up billboards for these young kids to see if we can generate some people talking, just because you're seeing their faces every day and putting in yard signs. But I really am concerned. I'm grateful for this $30,000, but I'm really concerned that we put that low of value on the life of 3 children. So when we talk about the George Floyd killing, which that was a killing by the police, but when we talk about that, we look at the different amounts of funds that were put into organizations in our community. And this is not a negative when I say it, because I say any funds you can get in the Black community, we need it. So if you put $30 million into a freedom fund, and then you put $30,000 in, that's $10,000 per bullet in a child's head. So I do have still some concerns. I'm very happy. I promise you, I'm very happy. But that message is clear where we set our values in our community.
And where did that dollar amount come from?
The 30,000?
Yes.
That's how much was raised. But on the other hand, the 30 million is how much was donated into that. So it just says a lot about we value more, and it's not me, it's not us, because we don't have any money, but it's saying that our white allies value freeing people from jail more than solving 3 kids with bullets in their heads in our community. So if it's not by the hands of the police, the value decreases on that Black life. And I do think that that's something we as a people have to look at. We want the value to be placed on all Black lives, but I do think we need to look at that.
Yeah, no, that's a really strong point. And I think it's important to note that it is $10,000 for each of the children that was arrested. And when you compare that to the amount of money that's flowing in and out of the Twin Cities right now, you're right, it is incredibly low. I want to pivot to Sasha Cotton right now and ask, Sasha, you work in the Office of Violence and Prevention. Why do you think that we're seeing this uptick in violence? And is it actually an uptick, or is it so much more visible now because we have social media, because things were already so polarizing after the Chauvin trial? What's your analysis on what we're experiencing right now?
So thanks for having me, Brittany. I think it's a both and for sure. Things are far more visible than they were in the past. Even when we're hearing a lot of conversations about Minneapolis going back to the state that we were in when we were dubbed Murderapolis. And at that time, we did not have social media and some of the other things that really highlight the challenges that we're experiencing. That being said, 2021, 2020, are statistically different, and our violence is statistically higher here in Minneapolis and quite frankly across the country. We know that the impacts of COVID are going to be felt for some time, and I think that both the financial impacts, the mental health impacts, the trauma impacts, and the cooped up, I mean, the natural, people are not designed to be in isolation for this long. And so when we are, there are outcomes that we can't anticipate and we can't predict what will happen. But we knew that people being cooped up away from each other, young people not being in school, people having an inability to connect with resources would have negative outcomes. And I think what we're seeing now are some of the ramifications of the pandemic. It's like a COVID craze. And unfortunately, we need to do more than what we're doing right now to get out in front of it.
Now, do you have statistics on who is committing this violence? Like, is it something where we need to make sure we're doing more youth outreach? Are these people who are going through mental health crisis? Do they fit in a certain tax bracket? Are these crimes related to poverty at all? Do you have any sense of who is doing this, and beyond COVID and some of these other conditions, what might also be causing this?
So certainly, because of the form in which we're in, focused on the Black community, I will say that overwhelmingly, it's our community that is deeply impacted, both as victims and perpetrators of the violence. I will also say that, unfortunately, what we're seeing are significant increases in young people who are perpetrating serious violence, and women. Historically, we had really seen most women who were victims of violence or somehow impacted by violence were often there as innocent bystanders, or bystanders in the sense that they were with a boyfriend or brother in the wrong place at the wrong time at a party. But what we were seeing in the last several years is women who are actively involved in the shootings, actively involved in the gang and gun violence. And that is a shift in our norms, and something that I think is a real cultural thing that we need to look at. And this is primarily in the Black community, Black women. And, we had done a lot to mitigate for youth violence in our community. I know we're going to talk about this a little later, but it is Youth Violence Prevention Week and the kickoff to Hot Safe Summer for Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Office of Violence Prevention. But we are seeing significant increases in the number of juveniles who are involved in gun violence and gang violence. And so statistically, that accounts for some of our increases, but some of it is just simply more. We know that disproportionately African-American men are impacted by gun violence, and that unfortunately is a number we continue to see increase as well. So across the board, our young people, our women, and our Black men are all being deeply impacted by gun violence right now statistically.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that information. I want to pivot to Adriene right now. Lisa mentioned something earlier that we talked about in a production meeting. Lisa said we're starting to get back to being Murderapolis again. Now, in a production meeting we talked about in the early 90s, that's around the time that you actually moved to the Twin Cities, Adriene. And I'm wondering, as someone who came in to the Twin Cities at a time of heightened violence, is what you're seeing now, does that look familiar? Do you feel more safe now than you did then? What has this experience been like for you?
Yeah, so safety is a relative term. I mean, in this day and time, who feels safe anywhere anymore? Because on the one hand, you have the Black on Black violence. On the other hand, you have the lack of protection because of police violence and because of white supremacists who perhaps are against you just because of the color of your skin. So safety is a relative term at this point. I do feel like we're going back to how Minneapolis was when I first got here. I moved here from Atlanta, and Atlanta has its own set of issues. And it just feels like anywhere you go, the inner city has the same issue of this increase in Black on Black crime. And I've been to Minneapolis. I don't live in Minneapolis, I live in the suburbs. But it always interested me that you could drive around and see cameras placed throughout the city. And I often thought, who's watching these cameras? So we've taken money from Head Start. We've taken money from summer programming for our youth. We've taken money from the social activities and organizations that were starting to move our community in a more positive direction. We've put it into the police. And so now we have this vicious circle of, well, if you call the police, you may get shot and killed by them. Sometimes when you call them, they don't come. Or if they do come and you're the one who tells them, well, I know who did the shooting and here it is, are they actually going to be there to protect you if there's retaliation in the community against you? And so it creates this vicious cycle of, we have no protection from ourselves or from anyone else. We don't have protection at all. And that is how I'm feeling now. I feel like we are back in that vicious circle of, we as a community really don't have any protection. We don't have protection from the violence within the community. We don't have protection from the people who were supposed to help protect us. And so I think what we have to do now is figure out, how do we move forward with fixing it? And so when we started with conversations about defunding the police and moving that money, I think police need a presence. Definitely we need a police presence. But I do agree that we need to take some of that money and put it back into the community. We need to get back to engaging our youth and our young people in activities that will move them away from the violence that's taking over the cities now. And I'm not saying there's this golden egg that's going to solve all the problems, but clearly more policing and more money into policing at the expense of the community programs has not worked. And so now we need to rethink that plan and look at different ways to provide what the community needs to move us out of this violence that occurs on a daily basis for a lot of people.
Absolutely. I want to pivot to Raisha Williams now, who is the founder of the Afia Sana Healing Center, as well as Guns Down, Love Up. Welcome, Raisha, to Black Life Amplified.
Thank you. And it's Afia Sana.
Afia, I'm sorry.
Afia Sana, yep, health and healing.
Afia Sana. Okay, what does that mean?
So Afia Sana is Swahili, and it means health and healing, which is the next phase of what Adriene was talking about. How do we begin to stop the vicious cycle and come into healing and health and love one another, and start that process as individuals?
I love that. I love that. Well, first and foremost, welcome to the show. I want to offer my condolences to you, as I did to Lisa, because you've also been personally affected by gun violence within the community. Your brother, Tyrone, was also killed within community back in 2018. How has your family been doing since this happened?
Yeah, I mean, we've mobilized since it's happened. We were always activists in the community, working within the community, doing different community engagement. And in the last few years, I've been an activist strongly fighting against police violence in the community. But when this happened, and it happened so close to home, we really had to take an internal look. And some of what Lisa is saying, I'm on the same page. We had to take an internal look and say, selfishly, this hit home. And even though we hear the gunshots all the time and we know others are losing, this is a real issue. And it unfortunately had to happen to us before we woke up as a family to recognize how serious it was. And then we became active, and we started to activate on how do we start to move forward a change in our community. And I think it's important to say that it's not going to be one specific action, one specific group. It's going to take all of us. Lisa and I, always don't necessarily agree when it comes to policing, but we always join each other in the community to do community events against gun violence, because it's going to take a mother's love. It's going to take Guns Down, Love Up. It's going to take all the other organizations, such as Bunny Beeks, who has an organization, and Fardi Shahir at Next Steps, and, you know, Sasha Cotton at the city. It's going to take all of us, because we're all going to hit many different groups in the community, and we're going to focus on different areas targeting the stop of gun violence.
Absolutely. And speaking of Guns Down, Love Up, what is that initiative, and how can people tap in?
Well, you know, it started off as a message campaign. I think it goes back to a couple of things, as many of the panelists have been talking about. You know, when we talk, I don't believe in black on black crime, because when there's a segmented group, or, you know, communities have their own internal crime. We don't call it white on white crime, but there's a lot of crime and gun violence that happens, such as mass shootings. So it's really about, you know, in our community, in this really small North Minneapolis hub, we have all these people coming from different parts of, you know, the country, and those who've been there for many generations, such as my family, and we're trying to figure it out. But we also have trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma that we're personally dealing with, on top of trying to survive the daily lives, right? And when we, you know, add in, you know, gang violence and drugs, you know, this is a lot that you're dealing with. And so, you know, a lot of my experience, especially the gun violence that we've been dealing with as of lately, is about, like, how do you resolve conflict resolution? So the sister who recently lost her life at Merwin's, you know, I don't know if many know the full details, but I was privileged to know that it was a conflict, and she knew the person. It wasn't just random. You know, with my brother, it was a conflict between two individuals. He knew the person, was born and raised with the same person, and they couldn't come to a conflict resolution. And so, you know, just seeing a lot of that, even in terms of retaliation, a lot of the gun violence that you see, you know, especially with the young babies who've been hit in the last few weeks, is retaliation. It's not even just gang violence. It's individuals having to retaliate. You killed my cousin. You killed my sister. You killed, you know, I mean, you killed my grandmother, you know, by accident, and now I'm angry and my trauma is built in, so I have to, like, revenge them. And so all of this trauma is just compounding, but we're losing the love. And really, I have to, you know, attest to my mom's love and commitment. When my brother was murdered, you know, it would have been very easy for, you know, my family, or, you know, family, friends, or even the community. My brother was a beloved activist, to go out and avenge his murder on our own. But my mom, in many press conferences, said, you know, I don't want anybody to go out and do anything, allow, you know, the police to take its course, which we had to fight to make sure happened, which goes to Adriene's statement about cameras being everywhere. We were able to capture them because of the cameras that were everywhere. But it's about love, you know, and so my mom's love for this other young man, you know, when we were able to capture him and he was being sentenced, you know, my mom had an opportunity to go up and talk about, at the court hearings, talk about how she was feeling and say her last statements to the young man who was being sentenced. And she told his family, you know, you've lost a son because he's going to go to prison for a very long time. And his child has lost a father. And I've lost a son because he'll never come back. So we keep losing our men, and we keep losing our women and our babies. And it's just constantly. So where's the love? So Guns Down, Love Up was a message campaign to center around love first. How do we begin to love each other and put the guns down, and then start talking about how do we move forward as a community?
You know, we definitely want to salute and tip our hat off to Miss Rosemary. Your mother is amazing. Definitely just an awesome pillar in the community and has done so much. And that was even prior to that. But then for her to lose one of her own babies, one of her own children, you know, despite the fact that he was an adult, you're always your mother's baby, yeah. Right? She was still able to say, you know, we have to think differently. You know, we have to deal with our grief in a different way. And that speaks a lot to her character, but also her capacity. What do you have to say to people who maybe haven't developed that capacity yet to deal with complex emotion, to deal with conflict?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where is the place for that to happen?
Yeah, I mean, even personally, on a personal level, it took me a long, long time to heal and forgive the young man who murdered my brother, and I had a really good friend that said, you won't move forward from this until you forgive him. And I was like, I ain't gonna forgive him. I hope they get him in jail. And I mean, all this anger and trauma of losing my brother, it took me a very long time to forgive him. And finally, one day I woke up and I was like, I really do forgive you, and I think it is a testament to humanity and love. And then also just realizing that the trauma was really hurting me, and like, how do I begin to heal, to be a better person and to move forward, which really ties in Afia Sana. And just real quick, Afia Sana is a nonprofit. It is a healing center for all Black people who identify as Black, ADOS, African, in the Twin Cities. And it's a place to come and get free healing services, which look many different ways, from, just participating in movement, from yoga and tap and ballet and African dance, to participating in healing circles and one-on-one counseling, free massages, or, coming in and learning some creative arts such as videography and photography. So it's just like, how do we start to tap into our cultural pieces of healing? How do we tap into the creative arts of healing? How do we begin to get back to our real humanity beyond the trauma, beyond the day-to-day grind of life, so that we can start seeing each other as that brothers and sisters again? I mean, there's this whole Black love movement that is resurging, right, on a national level, where we really are loving ourselves more, but it hasn't really trickled down to the day-to-day interactions with one another. So we're loving, who we are, Black pride and culture, but we really aren't loving our brother and sister quite yet. So it's really when you go through that trauma, just do the work, whatever that may look like, whatever healing looks like for you, however healing looks like for you, you have to begin to heal so that you can forgive. And once you can forgive, then you can move forward. And we have to start doing that, because it's just going to be a continuous vicious cycle of constant violence against each other, gun violence, domestic violence, all of the violence that, compacts what we're experiencing as a community.
Very well said. Thank you, Raisha. I want to pivot back to Director Cotton. It's Youth Violence Prevention Week. So I want to know what this means, where this week became named, and what can we expect to see from this week and beyond?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Brittany. So we are celebrating Youth Violence Prevention Week, and one of the reasons that we do Youth Violence Prevention Week is that although, as I mentioned before, the statistics indicate we are seeing upticks, we know that overwhelmingly our young people are doing the right things and they are making good choices and they need to be supported. And so while we need to highlight the fact that youth violence is an issue, and we need to make sure that people are aware of the increases and know where services are, like the wonderful work that Mothers Love and other organizations are doing to support people who are struggling with the issue of violence, we also need to provide violent-free social environments for our young people to just be young and to just enjoy some time together. And so we're partnering with agencies across Minneapolis to do just that, both highlight the issue of youth violence and to provide young people with spaces to be themselves. This afternoon, there are a series of events. There's a basketball tournament, 3-on-3 tournament at Weber that starts at 2 o'clock. There's a kite giveaway event at Farview Park this afternoon, and there are events every day through Sunday. And we are actually talking with our internal teams and thinking about doing a Youth Violence Prevention Week every month this summer, just recognizing that with the deep challenges that we're having, we need to make sure that we're uplifting that positive message and that young people know that the city and their communities stand behind them when they are making the right decisions, and that we stand with compassion and accountability when they are getting off track and need to be redirected. So that's really the message of Youth Violence Prevention Week, and you can find all of those events on our webpage, on the website for the city, as well as on our Office of Violence Prevention Facebook page.
And we did make a tiny URL just because I know the Office of Violence and Prevention, the website is very long. So if you go to tinyurl.com/stoptheviolencemn, that will redirect right to your office's website. So we want to encourage our viewers to go and check that website out so you can get details on the event, let the young people in your life know what's happening, and even beyond this week, find various ways to get plugged in and get engaged as as Raisha mentioned, it really is going to take all of us to do this together in order to truly stop the violence that's happening, in order for us to show that we love ourselves and that we love one another. I want to pivot now as we address, we're going to continue to talk. Oh, go ahead, Sasha.
I felt really inspired when Raisha said that, because the Minneapolis Office of Violence Prevention, our slogan is Minneapolis. It takes all of us to prevent violence. And I just think it's imperative that we all really stand on that message. And so thank you to Raisha for saying that. I don't know if you knew that that was our slogan, but it is, I think, a really timely thing to be saying.
Yes, and the sentiment behind it, we're going to have to continue to echo. And I think the statement about love is so incredibly important. For a lot of people, they may not know how to love themselves, right? Or they may have, because of, not for any fault of their own, but because of how white supremacy works, because of how media and messaging works, we're told from the moment we come in this world not to love ourselves and to be accepting of ourselves. And when you can't be accepting of yourself, it's hard to see that you're my mirror. I love you. You look like me. We come from the same place. We come from the same neighborhood. It's not about this block and that block. You're my brother at the end of the day. You're my sister at the end of the day. And I love you. And I think until we've done the work to truly know ourselves and to love ourselves and to undo all of the miseducation and the programming that we're given that teaches us not to love ourselves and not to love one another, we're going to continue to see these upticks in violence. And so there's definitely more work to be done. But all of it, as I mentioned, is not just on us. There is a public safety crisis at hand here in the Twin Cities. And so I want to start to address some of that. Lisa, I want to pivot to you. I recently learned that MPD is significantly understaffed right now. The number I got was that they were down like 600 officers or something like that. So my first question is why? And then my next question is, what can we do about this?
I think it's a lot of different reasons why they're understaffed. Some of the officers left and they should have left. Some of the officers are still on trauma leave, and a lot of these incidents are trauma filled. We can't say that we as a people are experiencing trauma from what we're seeing and working with every day in our community, and say that the police can't have trauma in their life for the things they see and work within the community. I think this gives the chief an opportunity to find people from within the community to be part of policing their own community. But what we have to do as a people is grow our own. We have to bring in people. We can't always sit on the sideline and say, you're horrible, you're horrible, you're horrible, but we aren't investing in any way in that. So I'm a both and. I think there are millions and millions of dollars that are coming through, especially in Minneapolis, but the state of Minnesota. And I think that we can invest in a higher quality police department, and we can do police reform at the same time that we do community reform, because if you're not doing them both, neither will change. So I am a both and person, but I don't think you have to rob Peter to pay Paul, because there's millions that are coming into our community that are not being invested back. And if I could say this last thing, a lot of the grant writing that happens in the city of Minneapolis for state and federal funding, it's written off of the backs of Black people's trauma and Black people's pain and Black death. But that money does not come back into our community. And why the Black community is not raising the issue about that, the only reason we're not is because we're not united in one voice to say, show us the money. Because there is money that comes in off of our misery that does not come back to help change our narrative in our community.
That is incredibly true. And I think we just have to just flat out say, if you are using whatever historical or empirical data that shows the myriad of ways in which Black people have been exploited, and you receive funding for that data and then choose not to reinvest in the said community that is already experiencing perpetual harm, you are using Black pain and Black trauma for exploitation and financial gain. And there's so much more that could be said on that, right? But we do need to see more resources coming into our community. Absolutely. I'm wondering, you being a former sergeant and seeing everything that's happening within our community and within the police force, a lot of questions have been raised about some of the officers retaliating because there was the Defund the Police initiative, because there have been such high tensions post the murder of George Floyd, and even before that, but especially after the murder of George Floyd, community and police relationships have been really in a rough place. Do you feel as if all of the officers who are actively serving right now are doing the best that they can? Because I think a lot of people in community feel like there's lawlessness, like no one's here protecting us anymore because they don't care anymore. What's your take on that?
Well, you won't get me to disagree. I think there are officers out there who are wearing their tears on their sleeve. Get over it. This job is not a popularity contest. You have a job and a duty to serve the people that you raised your hand to say you would serve. So that would be whether it's in good times or bad times. So if any of those officers can't do what they were hired to do, then they should put their papers in and leave immediately. So I do think that there is some of that. But I also think there's a huge error on the side of the community where we continue to lump all cops under one umbrella. So if we were lumped under one umbrella, we would not be happy with that. So I do think it is unfair that there are good cops out there doing a good job, but they get overshadowed by the actions of some others. So, but anybody that doesn't want to do that, I love doing it. I mean, I absolutely, if my old body could get back in my uniform today, I would wear my uniform proudly today. But I do think that some of the ones who have left should stay gone, and some of the ones who are still here not doing their due diligence for our people in the community, not meaning Black people, that they should put their papers in as well.
And speaking of people leaving, I want to ask Sasha Cotton, there's been an estimated $35 million in settlements from the city of Minneapolis to Minneapolis police officers who left after the murder of George Floyd. Can you provide context? Why are officers getting paid to leave?
Yeah, that is an important question and an important issue for us to be talking about. I think that there are really state statutes that delineate why, when officers leave, they receive the kind of compensation that they do. And so those are really good questions to be asking our state legislators and our House representatives about some of the state policies related to officer compensation when they retire or take a permanent or semi-permanent leave.
Okay, so I think that's important to note. And there was also another question that I had about, so I'm hearing that MPD is understaffed. We've heard, even in our production meetings, the past couple of weeks that we've been working up to producing this episode, we have gotten feedback from community members of bullets going through children's bedrooms, children or young people having their cars shot at because of mistaken identity. And when the family members went to the Minneapolis Police Department, they were told essentially, we don't have the capacity to address it. That in itself is a terrifying concept, to feel as if there's this uptick in community violence happening and no one, the people who are in this current system of policing, supposed to be protecting and serving, don't have the capacity to even respond to the amount of calls that are being made. But then on the other side, we're seeing Minneapolis police officers investing their time in taking down George Floyd Square, or when Diana was killed just a few days ago, people the next day came out and put flowers down. And when Winston Smith was killed, they painted the alleyway where you pull into that parking ramp. They painted it red, and it was painted over. We're just seeing all of this work being undone I feel like it's further traumatizing people who are already traumatized and grieving within community. And I'm wondering why police resources, and I can direct this to you, Sasha, or to you, Lisa, if either of you would care to chime in, but I'm just wondering why energy and dollars are being invested in tearing down memorial sites if the police department is so understaffed right now.
Yeah, that's an important question. And so the allocation of resources for police resources is certainly a question that I would suggest be taken to the mayor and the chief, simply because the Office of Violence Prevention is housed in the health department and we don't have any purview or jurisdiction over that. But I certainly understand people's frustration when it feels like there are really immediate and emerging needs and they're not being addressed, but other things are. And so I think those are, again, I'm not trying to pass the buck here, but I am trying to be respectful of the leadership within the city and encouraging our community to hold all of us accountable. And so those are questions that could be directed to the mayor and the chief related to the deployment of police resources for those things. And the question should be answered, and community deserves a response to the decisions that are being made by their elected and appointed officials.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I personally didn't know that that was the mayor or the chief who was possibly making those calls. And we have, for transparency with our audience, we have reached out to the chief. We were hoping that he would be on this particular show, but with all of the rescheduling that we did, he wasn't able to make it. But we are still working with his assistant to work on getting something scheduled to have a longer in-depth conversation about all of these issues. And so we do hope that we'll have the chief on in the near future. I do want to pivot back to Adriene right now, addressing this sense of lawlessness, especially I feel like it's increased after the murder of George Floyd and after the movement to defund the police. I want to know, do you feel as if you're being protected by our current law enforcement, or are you feeling as if some of this lack of ability to respond to some of these issues of violence is a movement of retaliation?
I can't say for certain. Again, this is just how you asked me how I feel. Mm-hmm. I do feel like there may be some conversations occurring in people's minds of, oh, well, you want to get rid of the police. We will allow you to feel the pain or the effect of not having the police. Not saying that that's what is happening, but I imagine that is, going through some people's minds. And I say that because I have heard comments from some people saying, well, maybe, and not necessarily from the police, but just, people in general in the community, that are against police reform, questioning, well, maybe we should let people feel, life without the police, so they'll understand what reform feels like. Whether that's actually happening or not, I don't know. Perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't, but, it just doesn't feel right now. And I understand that the police department is short-staffed. We have that going on all over the community where companies are short-staffed. They don't have enough employees. And so the community is having to deal with the impact from that. But it just feels like there may be more to the story and more externally that is impacting the police department's ability to respond and protect the community. So it'll be interesting to see what we find out in the coming days, weeks, and months in terms of, hiring more police, having more police come back to work. It'll be interesting to see what changes in the community as that improves.
You mentioned the way that it feels, and what I've heard a lot of community members reiterate over the past year is that there is a sense, there's a heaviness in the Twin Cities. There's an overwhelming sense of grief, an overwhelming sense of trauma that is palatable. You can feel it in the air. So I want to do this final segment before we move on to our COVID and closing remarks. And I just want to ask all of our panelists, as we work to address mental health in this heightened moment of tension and this heightened moment of violence, I want to start with Lisa. How are you navigating? You are boots on the ground. You see everything. I get a lot of my information from following you on social media. When you are seeing all of this devastation happen in community, what is it that you're doing to maintain your own mental and emotional health?
it gets really hard for us, especially when some of the victims are our family members. But, we talk a lot to pastors, we talk a lot to each other. We've only had one vacation. It was a 2-day vacation that somebody in the community paid for and sent us to Vegas. I slept the entire 2 days that we were in Vegas. But we don't really have a big outlet because our trauma gets intertwined with the trauma in the community, and it's just every day, every day, every day. So we have to compartmentalize it and kind of move ours to the side often. And we really don't have a problem doing that. We talk about it all the time, and I'll try to tell my team, hey, just take a break. You can sit this one out. No. This mom needs us, or this family needs us. So a lot of times we just put ourselves in the background. And then when we get a day, we just spend it with our kids, spend it with our loved ones, and just talk about what we're experiencing.
Thank you. Sasha, I'll go to you. Your job requires you to stay informed about a lot of violence that's happening within the community as well. So what are you doing to maintain your mental and emotional health while also staying informed on what's happening?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I know Lisa and her team are out there on the front lines, and, we work with a variety of teams. I get out there as much as I can myself to scenes and working directly with families. And so it is very heavy. I think that, spending time with family is really critically important, finding the joy in life and really offering our community some grace that, to your point, Dr. Brittany, a lot of this is rooted in white supremacy, and we have to acknowledge that, we're not we are behaving in ways that are problematic based on that trauma, but we are not the problem. And so finding the beauty in our Blackness is really important. As it pertains specifically to the mental health and well-being of teams that we work with and myself, we're actually working on identifying resources so that we can pay for mental health services and trauma services for those who are doing work on our behalf, because who heals the healer? If we don't find ways to take care of one another, then who will take care of our community? So we are actively working on that and trying to prioritize resources to make sure that they do the work and continue to be healthy.
Okay. And are you also thinking about, with this increase in violence, there are more people witnessing more violence? And so I'm thinking about not just the victim, but also the people who are witnessing. Is there any trauma support from your office right now, or that you guys are envisioning, so that people know how to cope once they've witnessed a violent event?
Yeah, that's a really important question too. We're actually working with the city council and the mayor through the American Recovery Act dollars to identify some resources that could be used to provide mental health trauma resources for community members who witness or are impacted by community violence, but also, sort of that recovery money. So if your house gets bullied through it, if there are needs for your child to go to play therapy, really thinking about the gamut, or if we need to do a community healing event, right? Just trying to think about the gamut of things we could be doing. So we're optimistic that money will pass city council. Please, if you're interested in that, contact me, encourage your council members to vote for it, because we really know how important that resource is going to be, especially in such a challenging time as a pandemic, to make sure community members can access the resources they need to recover from a bad situation.
Okay. And Lisa, I saw you wanted to add to that as well.
Yeah, the state of Minnesota also has a program. We work directly with someone in the state. They also have a program that is geared towards people who have been affected by the trauma, like the kids who witnessed Trinity getting shot on the trampoline. So there is a program through the state currently that helps witnesses who feel traumatized by it as well. It's just a lot of people don't know. That's the biggest part in our community. There's a lot of resources there that people just don't know exist.
And of course, now there is an entirely new wellness center in St. Paul. So Raisha, can you give us some more info on the services that you provide and who was eligible to come in?
Yeah, so where do the healers go? They go to Afiasana. Again, all you have to be is self-identified, Black, ADOS, African, African-American. We're talking about our people who come from the African diaspora or descendants of slaves. So Afiasana and this is not just for healers who need to be healed. This is for Black people to be healed. So you can visit our website. It's afyasanaa.com. Afia Sana again, or if you Google it or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And again, the spelling is AFYASANAA.com. And maybe you guys, Brittany and her team can put a link to our website in there for the viewers to easily access it. But, I think, it really starts with what Lisa's talking about. There's a lot of trauma and we're not getting the healing we need. And, I started to couple gun violence with police violence in a lot of my activism. And the last 2 years, we did a lot of community activities, especially in North Minneapolis. Guns Down, Love Up. We were having events every month, healing events that was funded by the Minneapolis Department of Health, and just really trying to create spaces for us to begin to heal. And so out of those events, we knew that we needed a center where we could go and heal as Black people. And selfishly, right after the George Floyd murder, I myself as an individual, I was just done. I didn't know how I would move forward in terms of doing community work. I became really depressed. And as I, started to work out of that depression and trying to be healthier mentally and spiritually and even physically, I, started to say, where do we go to get the healing and support and love that we need, the nourishment, the spiritual uplifting, the cultural uplifting that we need as a people. And Mother Attune has done a beautiful job. I don't want to act like this isn't been done, right? Mother Attune has done a beautiful job of creating a space like that, but we need more. And so Afia Sana functions differently in the way that we've coupled movement, arts, cultural arts, and healing. And I want Lisa to come and get your free massage because members get free massages every month. And so as an individual, you go to the website, you click become a member. And once you become a member, you are in there. There is no fees. Everything is paid for. Our ancestors paid for it with the labor and love that they put into this country already. We were funded by United Health to get it started. Minnesota Department of Health has also provided some funding, and we're seeking more funding because, as you know, those funds run out real quick and we need more dollars to be able to sustain. So if there's anybody listening and wants to get involved, you can donate, and you can also, if there are foundations or other government entities that want to support what we're doing, please reach out to us as well. But yeah, I want to encourage Black people to take the first step to come and heal. We are there. We're right on Snelling and University. So we're right in the heart of St. Paul. You don't have to go to the west or east side. You just hop off the freeway and we're right there. And it's open for all demographics that are in the African diaspora. It's open for all ages. It's open for grandma and grandpa all the way down to babies, for men and women. I want us all to come. If you are mixed race, but you have Black in you, which many of us, are in the gumbo pot of Black culture, you still are Black. So come, you're dealing with the traumas of Blackness, white supremacy, and all of that. So come get some healing. And Lisa, I really want to see you there. I'm serious about that. I really want to see you there.
Yes, Lisa, we want to see you there, and we want to see all of our viewers getting the healing that they need. We are so much better as a community when we first do the work to love on ourselves and make sure that we're well. So take advantage. I got chills when you said our ancestors paid for it.
Paid for it over and over. And just sorry to cut you off, but I mean, even the funding, we're all, Lisa said it best, we're all fighting for these pennies. We didn't get funded by the Minneapolis Department of Health this summer. And so we weren't able to be out there to do the work that we needed, but there were so many other organizations that they had to fund that they funded to do, right? But again, we're all fighting for these pennies and we're all trying to collectively do the work, but it's just pennies, and there's so much money out there. In North Minneapolis, there's over 60 nonprofits alone. And I would take the guess gamut that 99.9% of them are ran by white individuals from the executive level all the way down. And it's like, how do you have your predator come in and do the healing for you or take care of your people when they're systematically the cause of it? It's like poverty pimping. It's like, let's keep this money rolling. And so it's like, it is a larger conversation on the state and local level. But, I'm really happy Sasha's on this call because, they can't do it all, but it's just like we gotta, when we get this funding, it has to be big pots, and we have to bring all the people who are already doing the work to the table and say, let's collectively divide this so we can expand the work. Lisa needs more workers. She, has a lot of volunteers, but those people need to be paid too. Just, so it's like, how do we start taking money out of these white organizations that are in North Minneapolis and funding our organizations? How do we take money out of the Minneapolis city and fund our organizations? How does MPD get defunded and take that and put that into other organizations? Because we can only hear ourselves. Nobody else can do this but us. We are our greatest hope.
Raisha, I'm working on that. We are actually looking to find some additional funders to support all of the applications that we received this summer. You're right. We got 49 applications and we only had the resources to fund 15 of them. So there was so much good work that we could have done with more resources. And so I'm actively looking for additional resources from outside funders so that we can fund as many of those applications as possible. So stay tuned.
Got it. Lisa, you had a closing statement?
Yep, just to say that St. Paul always do it better. I don't know why that is, but we big in Minneapolis, but St. Paul always do it better. And I'll say this last thing, Sasha should not have to get defunded funds to operate the organization that she's in charge of operating, Office of Violence Prevention. And I'm going to say it to y'all again, there are billions of dollars flowing through the city of Minneapolis, in St. Paul, and the state of Minnesota. You should not have to rob Peter to pay Paul. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of in my life. I'll leave it there.
All right. Well, we do need to wrap up right now. Thank you, panelists, so much for your time. Adriene, I'm going to ask you to stick around and give us a quick COVID update. I think it's just so important for us to remember, as Raisha said, our ancestors paid for this. So we have, as a people, as a community, have been through so much. And while this is a very trying and traumatizing moment, we have everything that we need to get through it. We have everything that we need in one another. But it's also important to remember that in addition to the public safety issues, the community violence, we are also still in the middle of a global pandemic that has disproportionately impacted people that look like us. So Adriene's going to close out our town hall today, just giving us some updates since our last show. The governor has lifted restrictions. Adriene, how are we doing with COVID?
We're making progress. The positivity rate for testing is down. So even though we're still testing a lot of people, the percentage of people that are testing positive is down. Our rates earlier in the year were hovering between 6 and 12%. And we are down to single digits, 0.1, 0.3%, 0.6. So that is a good thing. That means that the vaccines are working. In terms of vaccines, we're making progress with vaccinating people. We are not at our 70%, as the governor has stated he wants to get to. We're close. We're getting there. Overall, we're hovering between 56 and I think maybe 65%. But if you look at the data by county, it's a little different. So that's really promising. For instance, in Hennepin County, they are running about 67 to 70% of their people being vaccinated. Ramsey County is right in there. Where I live in Dakota County is about 66% of the people 16 and over who are vaccinated. So we're making progress. We're making things happen. The number of hospitalizations are down, the number of deaths, the number of ICU admissions, everything is going down. The other side of that is, even though everything is going down, we're seeing a shift in where we're seeing cases and deaths and hospitalizations and ICUs. So for instance, in the past, the majority of the cases were in our middle age group, say 25 to 56. And now we're seeing the greatest proportion of cases in our younger people from 15 years old to 25 years old. And so what that says to me is we need to get our younger people vaccinated. We're not getting them vaccinated as quickly as we did with our 65 and over population. Our 65 and over population are well vaccinated. We're seeing the numbers go down in terms of hospitalization and death and illness for those groups. So the vaccines are working. Looking at it by race and ethnicity, even with those numbers going down, our community members and our Black, Brown, and our American Indian population still account for the greater proportion number of cases, hospitalizations, ICU admissions, and death when you're looking at age-adjusted rates. And so what that tells us that there's still work to do in our communities. And so I know that there are vaccine clinics literally everywhere. There is no shortage of vaccines in the state. There are multiple places that people can go to get vaccinated. They can go to Cub, they can go to CVS, they can go to Walgreens, they can go to Roy Wilkins, they can go to the Mall of America, get out of this heat for a little while, take the kids to the mall and get them vaccinated. So what we need to really do now is focus on getting our younger people vaccinated so that we can continue to see those numbers go down.
Well, thank you, Adriene. And if you are 15 and older, you're eligible for vaccination. Is that correct?
Yes. And it depends on where you go. Some places are still offering the Janssen vaccine, which is distributed by Johnson & Johnson. For those, it's 18 and over. For others, it's 12 and over. For Pfizer, it's 12 and over. Moderna, I think 16 and over. So it depends on where you go and which vaccine they're offering. If you're going to get vaccinated, you definitely should ask what the age limit is. If you're taking your child to get vaccinated, you most likely need to be with them to give permission, because if they're under 18, they will need the parents' permission to get vaccinated.
And in fact, you're doing another vaccine clinic on Friday celebrating Juneteenth. Is that correct?
We're actually not going to do vaccines. We were going to do them, and we decided we're just going to celebrate. So at Children's, we are going to have a celebration of Juneteenth. We'll have food from Black vendors. We will have an African dance troupe there. There will be line dancing to DJ Miss Britt. So we have decided we need to just celebrate.
Just celebrate. Yep.
Yes.
And I'm here for it. And we hope that you all are out celebrating as well. It was actually passed to make Juneteenth a national holiday through one part of our legislature. So we need the other side to follow suit so we can make this an official thing. But nonetheless, happy Juneteenth. We don't need them to validate it. It's always been our Independence Day and Day of Liberation. And we truly cannot be free unless we learn to love ourselves, love one another, and to make sure that we are not perpetuating harm to one another, because there's so many other places in the world where we're going to experience that as Black people. So Adriene, as always, thank you for joining us and for providing this information. Thank you so much to our panelists. Please make sure you catch the links in the chat so you can stay up to date on all the information that's happening as it relates to violence prevention. We are going to continue to have these conversations and make sure you stay tuned, because in 2 weeks, we'll be back Wednesday, June 30th. We're going to be talking about Black leadership amplified and how a few Black leaders have come together to make some sustainable change after the murder of George Floyd. My name is Brittany L. Wright. Thank you so much for watching Black Life Amplified, and we'll see you next time.